Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Development Hell Podcast. And we're doing things a little bit differently this week because we are initiating our movie club. So me and some of my friends are going to be watching a film each month, and we're going to be taking over the podcast and talking about that film. So this time around, we wound up watching Barry Lyndon, one of Stanley Kubrick's films, and what we're going to do instead of doing our coming attractions and deciding if we're going to greenlight or send a film back to development hell, we're going to be kind of introducing all of ourselves this time around because we have some new people joining the podcast. So I'm going to at least start with myself. You're obviously watching on my channel, so you might know who I am. But so I'm Shane. I have this YouTube channel. I've been doing the Wasteland Reviewer since August of 2016 when my first review was Sausage Party. And I did it without lighting on my laptop. Those videos look like crap. So at least they look better now. And I just hit my 200th subscriber. It only took me 4.5 years. So, and I also write with sifpop.com. So I put out a lot of reviews on there. And along with all the ridiculous amount of reviews that I do on my channel, I also do Lost in the Wasteland, where I get to interview people on their perspectives on film. So shamelessly plugging that. If you want to join the show, just let me know. And I'm going to be actually starting a new show, which this is news to all of you, is on the opposite weeks when we're not doing this podcast, I decided I'm going to start a show, Welcome to the Wasteland, which I kind of already started with Matt before COVID hit, and then kind of threw that to the wayside. But I'm going to be doing a show where each week I'm going to be talking about a particular film and talking a little bit about some coming attractions and answering some fan questions. So if you're interested in joining that show, just let me know, and I'll talk to all of you about that later. And my first show, which is going to be coming out a week after this, I'm going to be talking about Blood Simple. So I'm going to be doing a little series talking about my favorite filmmakers, the Coen brothers. So now that I'm done spieling, who would like to go next?
Well, I'm Alex, and my guitars are lit better than my face, but that won't always be the case. Now it sounds like a Dr. Seuss poem or something, but I'm just happy to be on here with you guys. And obviously I love music, but I love films, and I love movies, and I love talking about movies, and that's why I'm here.
Awesome, thank you, Alex.
I'll go next. Hey guys, I'm Vinnie and huge movie fan. I have my own. What was that? What was that, Shane? What was that?
Italians.
Is that because I'm Italian?
Yes. I've camaraderie here, Vinny. Oh,
So yeah, I have my own blog, cinemaconversations.blogspot.com, which I've been keeping up with since summer 2012. Just like Shane, I also write for sifpop.com, and I gotta thank him for that. He's the one who got me into that website, and happy to be here.
Awesome.
I'll jump in next, I guess. Sorry, Matt. So I'm James. Welcome to my classroom, aka Mr. B. And you may see Zsa Zsa, the dog, wandering in and out of frame behind me. So Alex pulled me in from St. Bonaventure. We go back quite a ways. Not Italian, but lots of British genes in my family. So this movie was a great choice for me to, explore. No, chin up, always chin up.
Always.
And then our last, but also Italian friend here, Matt.
Exactly. I'm as Italian as Morgan Freeman is Irish. In Shawshank Redemption. Now that's a deep cut. Let me say hi. So I'm Matt. I've known most of these guys for about a decade, which, wow, Shane, we're old. And then like
Don't tell me, because every time I look in the mirror, I see more and more grays.
Yeah, imagine like there was a time where like you ate like a whole carton of Ben and Jerry's and you didn't feel any guilt, and now you eat it and it's like, this is not good.
Matt, you've known me for 10 years too. Where's my shout out?
Oh no, exactly, yeah, exactly. All right, Shane, edit that. But yeah, I've known these guys for a while. I've been watching movies forever. I remember in high school, the first time I saw Forrest Gump, I was like, movies can't get any better than this. And then I randomly saw Pulp Fiction, and that got the middle finger. So that is 100% not my favorite film of all time anymore. But Pulp Fiction is fantastic, and I just been watching movies ever since. I don't know, they make you laugh, they make you cry, they teach you something, or they make you want to vomit. But either way, if it's done well, then you get a good reaction. So
See, a great film can make you vomit for a completely different reason than a terrible one. So, The Room makes me want to vomit, but not Room, The Room. But anyway, so we're going to be talking a little bit about, well, probably more than a little bit about Barry Lyndon. So this is a film from Stanley Kubrick from 1975, and Kubrick apparently was trying to film Napoleon and instead got this film greenlit instead. And this is a very big scale period piece starring Ryan O'Neal, and who's probably really the only big name person in this film. And this wasn't exactly the most well-received film for Kubrick upon release, but to be honest, not all of his were. Look at The Shining, it won Razzies. And you have Barry Lyndon here, which is about an Irishman who winds up going on quite the adventure across to Europe during the 7 Years' War and finds himself with a lot of money, married into a very rich family, and a little bratty stepson that gets pretty violent, doesn't it? But in terms of, we're going to go around a little bit talking about some of our initial thoughts. But first, how many of you, this was your first time watching Barry Lyndon?
Right here, yeah.
Literally the only one who had watched this before. Okay. So I'm trying to remember when I first watched Barry Lyndon. It was probably sometime in college. And what I remember most about this film is like, it's gorgeous. And it's purposefully made to look like paintings, because there are actually some really famous paintings that Kubrick replicates in the film for some of the shots in the film. But it's a strikingly gorgeous film. And we were talking about this before we hopped on, but like, it's surprisingly funny at times with how sharp the dialogue can be and how flowery the language can be when you're trying to call somebody something not so nice. But, and you I wasn't going to go exactly what I talked about before we started filming, but in terms of, it's perfectly directed, it's an absolutely gorgeous film, and it is 3 hours and 5 minutes. There's a lot to it. And there's scenes where it was shot completely with natural light, which is really impressive, especially some of the scenes where they have some gambling involved. And there are definitely some things that I don't love about the film. I feel like it does drag a bit for me at times, and I definitely like the first half of the film more than the second half. And I've never been the hugest fan of Ryan O'Neal, and not sure he was the best choice for the lead performance in this film. But you know what? He definitely tries to do an Irish accent. I'm going to leave it at that, though. So, Alex, what were some of your immediate thoughts about Barry Lyndon?
Well, you know, I didn't even think about the Irish accent. I didn't have a major issue with Ryan O'Neal's performance. I do think it's a beautiful movie. Just watching the first 15 minutes again, one thing you have to notice about a lot of Stanley Kubrick stuff is practical lighting, you know, in the cinematography. And for better or for worse, some of those landscape shots, they lose the sun, you know, in the shot, and the sun is gone, and now it's just like, it's darker. So just from more of a technical perspective, a lot of that happens, you know, when you're outdoors. But yes, I agree with you, man. It is a beautiful movie, and it is, you know, going in knowing that it's a Stanley Kubrick movie. This is a lot more subtle, and everything's a lot more subtle compared to the Kubrick movies that I'm used to watching. Between 2001 and Clockwork and Full Metal Jacket, The Shining, those Kubrick movies, this is right in the middle of all that in his pantheon of filmmaking. So yeah, it's a lot more subtle, and it is beautifully shot. It is beautifully shot.
Yeah, because this is after Clockwork Orange, but before The Shining. Because as his career went on, there was humongous gaps between movies. Like it was 5 more years before The Shining came out, and like 7 before Full Metal Jacket came out, and then 12 before we got Eyes Wide Shut, and then unfortunately he had passed away. But
so there was nothing between Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut.
nope. It was a very long period of time. Apparently, they took years to even just film Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah. I think I read that it took like it was like over 400 days to shoot it.
And film like that, like Eyes Wide Shut is not like the most complex movie either. It says a lot by how Kubrick didn't seem like the nicest person or the easiest person to work with, especially just ask Shelley Duvall.
Oh God!
Who was basically tortured on the set of The Shining.
While watching Eyes Wide Shut, like not to divert from Barry Lyndon, but I'm just saying, like on Eyes Wide Shut, like one thing that was constantly going through my mind was, what was their budget on Christmas lights? Because like every shot was Christmas lights.
Well, and the crazy thing is that was all shot in England. He wouldn't come to America to film.
Oh, that's right, because he doesn't like to fly.
They basically had to recreate New York City. And like, to be fair, like watching Eyes Wide Shut, it doesn't look like New York City. It definitely doesn't look like the same city. But that's a whole different point. Barry Lyndon doesn't look like New York City either, which is probably good because it wasn't supposed to be. But
that was your segue.
Matt, you know me long enough. That was exactly what you expected. So, Vinny, how about you go next? Since what were some of your thoughts on Barry Lyndon?
Well, just like what you and Alex were saying, you know, I do agree. It was a gorgeous movie. I can definitely see why. I can definitely see why it won like a bunch of technical awards with like cinematography, costumes, art direction, and all of that. You know, I will admit, I mean, like being a movie fan, I don't like saying that I get bored by a certain genre. I will say that for period pieces, I don't get bored, but like whenever I'm about to watch one, I do approach with some hesitation because just I don't know, like for me, like there is like the risk of like a period drama, like I don't know, like being dry and like not so interesting. But you know what, more often than not, I do end up liking it, and this was the case with Barry Lyndon. You know, if I had, I know it was 3 hours long. If I had watched it in one viewing, I probably would have gotten a little restless. But I ended up watching it in 3 1-hour segments, and by doing that, I wasn't like not once was I bored watching it. I was always engaged with it. I did really like Ryan O'Neal's performance. I think this might be the only thing that I've ever seen him in. I haven't really seen many of his other movies. Same here. But
same here.
I will say one of the things I really liked about it was the music. Like it was really cool. Like when I began watching it, like probably like maybe like 15 or 20 minutes into it, like I thought to myself, wow, like I don't think there's been like more than a minute that has gone by where there wasn't any music. Like there was like a constant use of music, and like that's one thing I really liked about it. And I think one moment, like one segment of the music that I really liked was the music that was at the beginning of the second half when they're playing the card game, and this was like when Barry Lyndon, and when he like starts making like heavy eye contact with the girl he ends up marrying. I can't remember what her name was, but but just like between the music, the candlelight, that and like this, the shots going back and forth between him and her, and just like that slow building of romantic tension between them. Like it just gets you so invested because you know like something is gonna happen between them, and you just can't wait to see what it's gonna be. So so that was my initial take of the movie. I loved it, and I'll talk more about it once we go on.
How about you, James?
Great. Yeah, I'll just pick up where Vinny kind of left off, I guess. So like, I love period pieces, but I'm a history teacher. So history buff, history teacher. On one level, I'm looking for accuracy and like, what can I show my students in class? What would be fun to show my students in class? Because I'm well aware that like most people they find period pieces to be dull, unless it's like a romance, which I find to be dull. Like if a period piece is done only for the romance, it bores the hell out of me, right? So this one, I appreciated the military, the uniforms being accurate and the slang being relevant to what they were doing. There was one scene particularly where they're punishing the deserters. I can't think of another film that I've seen two soldiers have to run the gauntlet. Like that's the only one I can think of. So I enjoyed it for Kubrick's attention to detail, like historically. And this period particularly, we're talking about Daniel Day-Lewis before we started recording, right? Last of the Mohicans is the only other one I can think of off the top of my head that's like from the same period. And I'm pretty sure he has a mullet in that film. So like the attention to detail was appreciated by me for sure. I also loved the soft lighting, the natural light, the framing. So like if I could plug, I have nothing to do with this YouTube channel, but there's a channel I might have shared with Alex before called The Beauty Of.
Oh yeah.
And that actually was my introduction to Barry Lyndon years ago. And I was like, why have I never seen this movie before? It's really, it gives a sense of like, almost like Russian Ark or something, that you're in a museum. Like the constant soft music in the background and the way time just kind of sweeps past in this film. It was odd. It was not at all what I expected. Not from Kubrick and not in general. So pleasantly surprised. I like the movie a lot. If I were going to focus on one thing, or maybe to ask of you guys, it would be like, I don't really know how to feel about the main character. I can't decide if I like him or if I despise him. You know what I mean? Like I have to respect his rakishness and his pluckiness. Like he came from nothing, you know, and he got what he wanted. He achieved the goal. But at the same time, you know, he treats his wife horribly, and he steps on other people along the way. So I'm a little conflicted on how to feel about him. But I enjoyed kind of the Freudian fatherhood issues that are like in every phase of the movie. From maybe is the first scene his father getting shot in a duel?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's a big part of it.
A little heavy-handed, I guess, but it held it together for me. It gave me something else to think about and to watch for, like just besides the period porn. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'll get it. I'm going to let Matt talk first before I jump into your questions, James, but I definitely have some thoughts specifically about like Redmond Barry as a person, and really does he kind of turn into a different character that second half of the film when he does become Barry Lyndon, which is interesting. But Matt, I saw you immediately throw the thumbs down on.
Yeah, he gets two thumbs down for me, dog. He oh boy. So I mean, you can be ambitious but not be like Daniel Plainview, right? Like you can be like a chill person that doesn't. Let me back up. First, right before I started watching the movie, I immediately looked at the trailer because I don't think I had ever heard this movie before. So I went on the trailer, And then I watched the trailer. I was like, that was interesting. And I spent the next 20 minutes trying to find where this theme, this music is, wherever I heard it before, because it sounded really awesome, but super familiar. It took me so long. I finally like realized that that's the same music that they used in the trailer for The Raid 2, which is a very different movie. Incredibly different. Can't be more different. But so and then I guess like on the recommended videos, it was the acceptance speech for the guy that actually did the score, the composer, for his Oscar. And like a lot of his influences were like a lot of like classical, like actually like classical things. And like he was like, I really wanted to, I'm paraphrasing, like I really wanted to I guess do those grades really well. So I wanted to thank them for how they influenced what I was doing here. And I didn't even think I was gonna win. So this is really awesome. But Kubrick really like believed in me. So that was pretty cool. Watching the movie, I mean, it's like a lot of people just being like really crappy to one another. I actually don't. I think my favorite character, it has to be his eventual son, his adopted son, his stepson.
Stepson.
I guess I'll go into it later, but he was probably my favorite character, and I think like the most thankless like acting probably has to come from like this guy's wife in the second half, right? Because she has to go through everything, and she doesn't always get to talk out what she's feeling, but she has to really she really has to like sell the fact that like she is trapped. She definitely made a mistake in shacking up with this other guy. She like is just bleeding money, right? She's just bleeding all of, and it's not just money, but it's also like her status, and she's bleeding it onto Barry. You know what I mean? Like that's pretty, and she's just so sad all the time. Like honestly, like she's so pale, and I kept thinking about Bram Stoker's Dracula. If you guys have ever seen it, there's a scene in that movie where there's someone that basically dressed exactly like the wife in this movie, except she's a vampire. I kept thinking that the wife was gonna bite him. I was kind of hoping, because I hate her. I hate him.
Plot twist.
Yeah,
Everybody in
exactly.
France in this movie is a vampire. Everyone, the whole second half of the movie, vampires.
And then Kate Beckinsale comes out of nowhere and starts karate chopping people.
It's not a Robert Rodriguez Tarantino production.
And then Keanu Reeves comes out with that accent.
Salma Hayek with a snake. What is that about?
This turns
I don't
into From Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah.
Plot twist, everything's a vampire.
I mean, I like the movie. It was uncomfortable to watch sometimes because it's like your main character, he does like, he goes on a journey, you're going along with him, and there's some pitfalls and some obstacles. He literally, like, I think a day into him trying to like go forth on, get the heck out of his village or whatever, he gets robbed. So like there's a lot of stuff that makes you want to care for him, but then he slowly but surely just loses every ounce of like any empathy I could give him. And his mom is like, she's like a couple steps below Norman Bates' mom. She's just terrible. Hate her too. But yeah, but no, good move, a good pick, Shane, or Shane's calculator, should I say?
He takes one step toward morality and two steps back. I mean, the entire story. And so exactly, you kind of want to like him. But I found myself, and I'm reflecting on the movie, I found myself wondering what the movie's really trying to say. I'm not exactly sure, in that, sense of one step toward morality, two steps back. Interesting what you say about the mom, Matt. I didn't really think about her that much, but she's just she never remarries, and then in the end, she just wants to take control. There's a possessive quality about both the mother and the son, ironically. And I think that also is related to what Jim, you were saying about the loss of the father, Freudian thing, looking for the father in other characters throughout the film. I have a lot to say, well, not a whole lot to say, but I think I condensed it about symbolism because I think there is some really good symbolism in this film, which I can get into now or a little bit later.
That's really interesting. You know, at the very end, like I was watching, I remember like I asked myself, so what did I learn exactly? Because people were just terrible. And this bad stuff happens, and sometimes if you're merciful, like you still get shot and you have to lose your leg. Like people are just bad. So Shane, I guess it kind of reminds me of the end of was it Burn After Reading? Where it's like, so what did we learn here?
I don't even know.
I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting because like I have a tendency to make references like that to certain films. Like there's certain films if I like sitting there and it's just like they just keep throwing this and that and this and that at the protagonist to the point where it's like it's overwhelming. It's a Revenant. That's how I felt watching The Revenant. I'm like, oh my God, how much more things can you possibly do to this character? And then, but like I always reference Burn After Reading. When I sit at the end of a movie, I'm like, what was the point? By the end, it's just like J.K. Simmons just sitting there is like, what did we learn here? I don't know. And he's just like, I guess we wait. But like at the end of this film, it's so interesting because I guess one of the best places to really start the conversation about this film is Redmond Barry. Because like there's quite a few other characters in this film, but none of them that are on the screen, at least until the second half, that are on their prolonged periods of time. This is his film. Through all 3 hours and 5 minutes, you're stuck with him. And I feel like in the first half of the film, I feel bad for him in many ways. And like the perfect example, Matt, you brought up when he gets robbed by that father and son, and he's just like pointing both barrels at him. It's like, sorry, son. I'm gonna have to walk. I'm gonna have to take your horse. And I feel like maybe it was the accent that took stuff away from me in terms of Ryan O'Neal's performance, but like his physical acting, I bought. Like there's a couple of points, there's like this really long shot of him walking towards the camera, just looking defeated after that. And he's just like, his shoulders are slumped in a certain way, and just the way you're walking, like, that guy just got screwed so badly by life. And you can see it all over his body language. And I don't know, I feel like up until it switched to the second half of the film, I was still in his corner, thinking like, you know what, he's been on this crazy adventure. There's things that happen to him. And then I feel like in the second half, he just becomes despicable. And I'm just like, you brought this all on yourself. And I feel like the moment that I really lost faith in him, and this is such a great scene, is when, and this goes back to Matt, what you were talking about, how thankless the performance of the wife is from, I think it's Maria Berenson, who plays Lady Lyndon, Marissa Berenson. She's walking through like the gardens, and like she stops and is looking, and it has that camera shot of Barry just like making out with some random woman there. And it's just like that holding shot there. I'm like, ooh, you bastard. And it's just like at that time, I'm like, yeah.
I look at that as his retribution for his cousin leaving him for the Englishman. I mean, that's how I interpreted that, is he was emotionally getting retribution for having had his heart broken in the first act. But I don't know if that's what you guys took away from it, because I don't think that's a wound that ever healed, you know.
And I thought that was so interesting at the beginning of the film, because that's such a great scene, because like it shows a lot in Redmond Barry how hesitant he is about like that whole thing where like his cousin slips the ribbon down her cleavage, and she's just like basically, are you gonna grab it? And he's just like,
I don't see it.
And it's just like, you could tell he definitely had feelings. And that's like a nice, like, if that were in a different film, that would be such a nice, like, building a tension scene. And then look at what happens next. He winds up getting himself in a duel. And it's kind of like, it's like, there's something often dirty about a lot of the stuff that happens in this film, because it's like, this isn't like a nice period romance. This
There's
is
so
pretty
much
messed
I
up
want to
film.
say that I'm not going to say.
Is it the ribbon part? Because
No,
like that was
it
really
has to
funny.
do with
I've never even
cousins.
thought of that. Like in real
Cousins
life.
and what's second cousins and what's right and what's not right. That's what's on my mind.
It's just like, they didn't care, right? Apparently back then, during all this.
There's
Not
a
really
devil
at all.
on this shoulder. I'm like, and there's another devil on this shoulder. Like, say it, say it, say it. You know.
Like your cousin.
Yeah, I think it was more about like he was a good innocent kid. I think that's what that scene was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like Darwin married his second cousin. It was not that big of a deal back then.
It wasn't right. Exactly. It happened. Right. It happened more often.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And so okay, so pulling the handkerchief, right? Is it a handkerchief or a ribbon out of her bosom? That was, he's so vulnerable. And one thing I was gonna say is throughout a lot of the movie, he's very insecure, and that was kind of ripping a Band-Aid off.
Matt has very strong feelings about the statement that Alex just made.
Alex, yeah, he's like a kid. He's either like shy or or people are like pushing him to do stuff that he sort of doesn't really want to do. Like he like sold that guy out, or he's like or incredibly impulsive or like vindictive or pouty, and he's running to his mom for like life advice. He's a kid. He's through the whole movie. Only difference is that like he's a kid with no power and no cash, and then he's a kid with power and cash. But like I mean, like every once in a while, I'm not ashamed to say that I cry. But dang, dude, do something. Like I feel like circumstances, like it's almost kind of like the reason I like the son is because the son fights back. I'm not saying the son is like a role model, but the son like does stuff. I feel like he kind of just like goes through situations kind of happen to him, and then he kind of just rolls with the situation. That pisses me off because it's like, no, like do something right now. Like, also your wife is incredibly gorgeous. Why are you cheating on her? But that's has nothing to do with film critique. That's more preference. But
That's how you
like,
really feel,
that's
Matt.
pissing me off. Yeah.
But Vinny, what were you gonna add?
No, I mean I wasn't really gonna add anything, but I was gonna say, like, I know some of you say that that Barry is a pretty unlikable character, but I mean the way I took it was that like for the first half of the movie, really like nothing much goes his way, and you guys brought up the scene when he's walking through the forest and he's robbed by that father and son. But then like the second half of the movie comes along and he does reach like a high standing in society, and like it is under, I mean I'm not condoning his actions, but it's understandable that the success of that social climb does, like, it makes sense that it would go to his head, and like if you start he starts mistreating people, and like he was never in that position to do that before. So it does, from like a thematic standpoint, it does kind of make sense that he would fall into that sort of trap and just become like this totally different person that at first we felt bad for, but now we don't feel bad for him. But I will say I'm glad he had like that one like sort of like redemptive moment in the second half during the duel when his son's pistol misfires, and then he has to wait until Barry has his turn to shoot him, and then you keep thinking that Barry is going to shoot him, but then he decides against it. So I mean, I know like once we reach the end of the movie, we still like we've gone back to the point where like we don't really feel sorry for him, but I did appreciate like that brief like redemptive sort of moment that he had when he chooses not to shoot his son, and you realize, oh, he does have like a little bit of a heart still left in him.
I'm glad you brought that up, Vinny, because I really don't think that you can take just a wide brush with this character and say that he's one thing or another. I really do think that he does have those redemptive, moments. And I think that him shooting into the ground as a way of respecting, I really felt like that was a way of saying, like, this person had the potential to be a good man. And I think that's a thing that's also sort of tragic about it, is that he's, the entire thing is him trying to be something that he's not, and it's very sad.
Could we talk about that scene that Shane brought up? First of all, Vinny, great point about him throwing away his shot, which drives home, like, is this movie Hamilton? Is this just Hamilton in 75? Like, orphan, grows up pursuing fame and fortune, split into 2 acts. It's a rise and fall thing. It's about a duel, like so many Hamilton parallels. But I like that you guys are talking about the scene because it completely went past me when Barry gets robbed by the father and son duo. Completely went past me the first time I watched the movie. So, like, Barry didn't have a father. I've got a list of father figures here from the movie, but we can leave that for a moment. So Barry doesn't have a father, but that's no guarantee that he's going to turn out well, because look at this father and son duo that are highway robbers. You know what I mean? So, like, I don't know. It's just very interesting.
And especially going along with, like, the themes of, like, father and son, I felt so conflicted during that final duel at the end, because it's interesting, Matt, that you brought up that your favorite character is the stepson. I hated his stepson a lot, but it was so, because the more I think about that scene, because it's like Barry does show he has respect and he's not a completely lost cause. I guess one of the things that makes me conflicted about his character is, like, he feels so very different. Like, right after the film cuts to the second half, where he's this down on his luck kind of guy, and maybe he might find some luck now. Then the second half ends, and then boom, he's married and he's sleeping around already. And I'm just like, it's so immediate that he became unlikable to me. But then at that scene, because it's like, I don't want his son to shoot him, but can I blame the stepson for shooting him after he's treated him like crap that whole entire time he's been in his life? And I have to say, one of my favorite scenes in this film, because, like, I feel like a lot of Kubrick films can feel cold and distant in many ways. And there's not a whole lot of moments that really stick out in his films that I feel like that there's a lot of, like, raw, raw emotion. But that one scene where the son is being a real ass during that, like,
the concert,
during the performance, and Barry just winds up completely decking him and, like, hopping on him and, like, beating the crap out of him. I was shocked. Like, the first time watching, I'm like, I did not expect this in this movie, because it feels so aggressive and raw in this film. And, like, they had, like, 12 guys trying to pull Barry Lyndon off of him.
Yeah.
And, like, that scene really stuck out to me because, like, I don't think, like, I feel like that's probably the point where his stepson wouldn't show him mercy in that duel.
There were some scenes where, to speak on pace, and spontaneity, just for a second, there was some scene. That's a good example. There's another scene where, in the beginning of the movie, where he tosses the wine into the British general's face. There were a few scenes that had the spontaneity of, like, whoa, that's not supposed to happen in the late 18th century. You don't do that. Whereas other parts of the movie felt like I was kind of being trucked along you know, this happens, then this happens, then this happens, for better or for worse. That's the movie that he made. But then those scenes happen where it was like, oh shit, you know, like, you know, so that was, I love that he did it. He chose to do it that way. And playing back into his insecurity, you know, yeah, Matt, I want to hear you talk a little bit more about the stepson, because the stepson, I didn't hate him. I didn't love him. The way I looked at it was, he's a made man the day that he's born, his stepson. He grows up in a big estate, you know, he's beating, you know, a guy who was born in that house, and he's beating him, you know, because there's an obvious, like, something's not right about this guy. This guy doesn't belong here, Barry Lyndon, I mean. And so the way I interpreted it was, he's beating his stepson. He's beating a young man that he would have never been. He would have never been at that place in the hierarchy. And so that's why he's beating. Of course, you know, in real life, it doesn't rationalize the behavior, but it does speak to the insecurity and to him, you know, emotionally having to feel like he's bigger than his own stepson. He's the man of this house. Damn it. You know, like that's kind of what I took from that.
If that's, then that just makes, well, yeah, it just goes back to me, like, not really liking him. Like, I don't think that he would have, for me, I don't think that he would have like shot the ground if things weren't already going bad, you know, like with inside of Barry's life. Like, I don't think he would have did that. I think for me, and this is like really subjective, obviously, but like, I feel like it wasn't so much a mercy thing. It was more so kind of like a giving up thing. Okay, fine, take it. I don't know, whatever. Like, that's how I felt about it. I don't know, but like him, way, like, maybe don't hit your adult kids with sticks. That's number one. Number two, like, like that's number one. If you're gonna do that, then it might be hard for me to connect with you. But like I don't know. But I like the stepson, because for me, even though he did seem kind of snotty, it was also kind of like when he was, because it was like, you know, he's a kid, and then when he's older, like when he's a kid, like he made like more than one reference to, like, it's not just, I don't like this guy that's dating my mom. He also said, like, you are not my dad, like, or like, I do have a father and his name was Lyndon. Like, I feel like he misses his dad. It's not just kind of like a overprotective kind of thing. So then I kind of like it's still clingy and I don't like it, but I like it more. I like the stepson's relationship with his mother more than Barry and his mother, because I don't, there's like a protection kind of thing over here, even though the stepson honestly can't really do much. But then over here, it's more kind of like a, mommy, I need you to kind of be my backbone for me kind of thing. For me, that's how I watched it. And then and then the stepson, like, I don't know, he doesn't back down. Like, yeah, like there's a golden kid, and then there's me. Yeah, but I'm gonna like shake you and yell at you and spank you, which is also weird. But I'm gonna spank you anyway, because like, screw that. I'm gonna make a complete fool out of myself just to piss you off, Dad. I'm going to shoot you, Dad. Like, I feel like that means that he's okay with like striking back, and I liked that about the stepson. Again, he's not a role model, but I think that he's a way cooler person. I would love to hang out with the stepson in Applebee's versus Barry.
Can we talk about his relationship with his mom real quick? Because
Yeah.
So I was sitting watching this movie with my girlfriend, and I guess she wasn't paying complete attention, and then she like looks back, and there's this scene where the stepson is grown up now, and he's like leaning up against his mother's legs, like sitting there, and Jess was like, is she cheating on Barry now because he cheated on her all these times? And I'm like, no, that's her son. And there's something a little uncomfortable about how close he's sitting with his mom.
But who said something about Freud? Was that James? Was that you said that, James? Yeah.
There's
Perfect.
a lot of that in this movie, I think. Because, like, and here's another interesting, because, James, I know you brought up a bunch of father figures, because there's that one soldier who shows a lot of respect to Barry, and then he winds up leading him in battle, and he winds up getting shot in a battle. And it's just the two of them in, like, this ditch. And, like, he's like, "Can you kiss me, my boy?" And, like, plants a kiss right on his lips. And, like, I'm sitting there like, I don't know if it's, like, a different kind of cultural thing, time period wise. Still think that's a little odd. Like, kissing your father figure right on the lips as he's dying. But I'm like, there's definitely some level of those kinds of feelings throughout this film.
But there's a lot of kissing in Saving Private Ryan, though.
Was there?
I didn't know if that was a joke. I haven't seen that movie in a long time.
Same.
I've watched it in the past year, Matt. I don't remember any kissing as people were dying in Saving Private Ryan.
Different century, different type of man too. But he's overly affectionate with his own with his actual blood related son. Overly affectionate. Also kissed him on the lips, and then the contrasts with being not having any affection, or at least, I mean, I think he does hug his stepson at some points, but eventually he ends up beating him.
Yeah.
So there's a contrast there. But I didn't think about the comparison between his stepson's relationship with the mom. By the way, he looks older than his mom, but that's a Hollywood thing. I think they've improved that somewhat over the last 5 decades.
It's like, well, did they? They still did it in Alexander, because I'm pretty sure Angelina Jolie isn't old enough to be Colin Farrell's mom.
That's also an Oliver Stone film. Who's,
and then also in The Graduate, I think Anne Bancroft was only like
a couple years
older. I don't think Anne Bancroft was more than like 5 years older than Dustin Hoffman when they made that, and yet she was she was made up to be like a middle-aged mom.
Yeah.
I can't do the arm thing.
There's a history here. But back to your point, Alex.
Yeah. Long history with casting of much younger actresses. But no, I just didn't think about that comparison there. And I think there is definitely, I don't know if it's supposed to be a Freudian thing, but it's definitely there. Hey, I don't know what I take away from a lot of the storytelling. Also, Cinderella helped me out. Wasn't Cinderella the stepdaughter, and it was her stepmom?
Yes.
So there's a long history of storytelling that, with like stepchildren having to kind of gain approval and gain acceptance. So that's a big thing in storytelling. So I do think that they're leaning on some of those classic storytelling of things there. Totally. It plays into the insecurity.
And before we get too ahead of ourselves, remember, this is a Kubrick film. There's 100% weird Freudian things in this movie. Because it's
not only that, but the time period, right? Like the 70s, Freud was very popular in the 70s. And I'm no scholar, but like if you look at that conflict between the stepson and we'll say Barry Lyndon, right? And Bullingdon, which is an interesting name to choose, right? Like, I think, correct me if I'm misquoting Freud, but like every son wants to, grow up to, let's say, have his mother and displace his father, right? So like Barry knows that his stepson is growing up to replace him, but Bullingdon is fully within his rights, to do that. I don't know if that adds a twist, to that whole relationship or not.
Well, that's interesting, because if that's what's going on, then his father dying at some point means that, like, on some level, maybe he kind of is stuck, like, developmentally in like a younger kid role, because the next step after hating your dad and wanting to have your ma is that like that hate and fear, like you know you can't do anything, so you start to identify, and then that's when you start to love your dad. But if that's what like Kubrick is saying, that if certain things happen when you're a kid, then you kind of become like emotionally like paused in some ways, then yeah, then maybe that's the reason why I felt like he was immature. Damn, that's a really good point. So that was my point. Shane, edit that out. Make it seem like I said it.
That's a good point, you know.
Because I like Matt, I appreciate that you brought up the idea that like he does act immature this whole entire movie. It's just the second half of the movie, he has power. And seeing somebody with a lot of power acting irrationally and immature shows a lot. And we've talked a lot about like the characters and stuff like that. Something I would like to talk a little bit more about is like technically from how this film's put together. And I did a little, when I rewatched this for this purpose, I did a little review for my channel for it because I had never reviewed Barry Lyndon formally. And how I put it is, if you're a cinephile and you love film, this is something you have to experience, because there's a level of craft in every Kubrick film that's just to die for from like a film perspective, whether it's those really wide shot, big portrait shots of just landscape. He puts so much effort into, like, when I really love a film and the cinematography, I'm like, I could take that frame, throw it up on my wall. It looks like art. Literally, this film is supposed to look that way to begin with. And there's just like the whole particular scene, and I watched the whole entire video breaking this down from Cinefix about that one candlelit poker game, like the gambling of the, if you can see the white of someone's eyes in that scene, you're not supposed to be paying attention to them. And it's done so purposefully, because if that person's not the focus of the shot, they're looking away. So then you see the white of their eyes. So like, if I never thought of that, and then I rewatched that scene with that video in my mind, and I paid attention, and it's pretty remarkable how that takes you through that scene and what you're supposed to be focusing on, because there's some great just glances in this film and building up tension, whether it's anger or sexual tension, depending on the scene. And that scene works so well because of that. And it's a beautiful scene because the candlelight, the framing of everything, and they didn't really have to say anything. It was all through glances. And it's just like, you know exactly what they're doing with their eyes.
Mm-hmm. Can I bring up a scene before that?
Mm-hmm.
So because I mean, I know what scene you're talking about, and that was, definitely was a lot of like indoor scenes where the candlelight's really good. I remember this scene. I'm going to go back to character here for a second, because one of the scenes that's very early on in Act 2, I think it was Act 2, or it might have been the very end of Act 1, when he first meets the man that he ends up spying on card games for. He ends up spying on him. And that scene, I thought Ryan O'Neal, some people might say it's not good acting, but in that scene, I actually was like, wow, he's really walking the tightrope here as an actor and with this character, because he basically he can't stand up straight anymore with this imposter act. He's completely lost identity, I think, of who he originally was. And he goes to this man who you come to find out is also sort of an imposter of sorts. And they have this camaraderie together. And that's just a really, really special scene in the movie for the character and for those two characters. And I think for a long time, I kind of felt like there was kind of a lack of intimacy in the movie up until that scene. And I said, okay, like, wow, I really related to those two in that scene. And I was kind of rooting for them when they were cheating in the card games a little bit. That might speak to something inside of me, but I had to put that in there, because in this conversation talking about good, bad, redemptive, insecure, I was like, I like that. I'm with him. I'm having a cup of coffee. I am with him at Applebee's in that scene.
Wait, actually, can I ask you guys that question?
Wait, I was
You
gonna
guys
say.
tell me what happened, Vinny?
I actually have to get going, so I'm gonna sign off right now. But you're just gonna swipe me, Matt?
No. You're my
Goodbye.
No. You're on my phone.
Okay, so all right. So before I go, Matt, can you play me out?
Yeah, sure. Let me say. And then Vinny, before you go, can you say if you would hang out with him at Applebee's?
I would hang out with first half Barry Lyndon, not second half Barry Lyndon.
You would hang out with Redmond Barry, but not Barry.
Yes,
Barry,
exactly.
Ooh, okay. Well said, Shane.
That's interesting. Okay, Vinny, this is for you, man.
Yep, play me out.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Bye, Vinny.
All right. See you guys. All right. So I'll see you guys in a month for Paths of Glory.
Yes.
All right.
Surprise! We're watching Paths of Glory.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I spoil? I'm sorry if I spoiled it.
I was going to say it at some point. So
okay.
beat me to the punch.
We'll fix it in post.
Good idea. All right. Take it easy, guys.
Would you guys hang out with Barry at Applebee's? So Alex said yes, he would, or at least the first half.
So I brought up a point that I was going to bring up, is that it's so interesting because Redmond Barry has to be so many different people in this film, because he disguises himself, like he dresses himself up as a soldier. It's like, this guy's not a soldier. And then he winds up being a Prussian soldier. It's not a Prussian. It's not even Prussian, but he's in their army. And then putting on that act with that other man who's also putting on an act to hide who they really are. And it's sad to think that probably 30 minutes into this film is the last time we see Redmond Barry getting to be Redmond Barry. And throughout the whole rest of the film, because like then he becomes Barry Lyndon and he feels like a completely different person. And that idea of identity is lost there. So like, yeah, I would hang out with Redmond Barry from the beginning of the film and maybe at the very end of the film, because I think when he loses all that money and he has all that shame, he loses his leg and all of what happens to him, I think he's Redmond Barry again at the end, where it's just like, he doesn't have anything else to lean on or disguise himself with. He just has to be who he is.
But now he's back to leaning on his mom again, who isn't like for me, like a cool person. So which means
kind of where he started.
Did he learn anything? Did he learn anything then? Like if he were to like a month after the movie ends, someone gave him, okay, Barry, here's $1 million, whatever currency name, whatever country's in. Like he would he'd probably go back to the way he was before. He'd be a jerk again. For me.
Hey,
well,
Matt. Hey, remind me not to introduce you to my mom.
Yeah, no.
So,
let's go back to Freud for the third time.
Well, and what's so interesting is because if you think about Kubrick's filmography, what was the film right before this? A Clockwork Orange. What's so impactful at the end of A Clockwork Orange?
He does not learn.
He was reformed, all right.
Yeah.
No, he was not. He was the same messed up person at the end of that film after all that he had been through. And I feel like that's so interesting about Kubrick because, like, there's many ways where this film doesn't feel like Stanley Kubrick would make a film like this. But then you think about he adds so much of Kubrick into this film, like the strain, like the I guess what would be considered taboo kinds of relationships between people, because like this is the man who made Lolita, and just like nobody was going to make that movie, but Kubrick did. And who would make A Clockwork Orange into a film? Kubrick did. And my God, Eyes Wide Shut. That's just like Taboo the movie.
Well,
like
so Clockwork and this, there's definitely what you're talking about with you know, at the end of Clockwork, there's hypocrisy, right? I mean, there is an element of hypocrisy in society in general. I mean, you know, I don't know the history well enough behind it. I know enough about the 1970s in America, when the hypocrisy that happened in the early 70s, that era, because in the way that affected films, but I don't know enough about what happened in, what is this, late 1700s. But there's certainly an element of hypocrisy in that, because if you're looking just at these types of characters that are being painted in terms of, are they good, are they bad, good choices, bad choices, but you're also looking at well, now that you're climbing these scales, this ladder in our society, you know, are you making the choices, or are the choices making you? You know.
That's a great, yeah. If I could jump in there, so I'm not a scholar on this period in history, right? But like, first of all, you guys made some great points that helped me to connect Kubrick to the movie, because I'm not well versed in Kubrick, but what I'd seen from him was, like Shane said, cold and distant, I think were the words he used. That nails it. To me, Kubrick is cold and distant. So like, to view the movie as a series of like paintings come to life, really cool, and it kind of fits with how I understand Kubrick. And also he builds the tension really, really well. If I could insert some trivia that I picked up from the IMDb comments, this movie was based on a Thackeray short story. William Makepeace Thackeray, I think is his full name, a British guy. So to put kind of a meta spin on this, England was occupying Ireland at that time. Ireland was kind of an unwilling member of the British family, if you will. So tell me if this is a little bit of a stretch, but like England in a way was like a stepfather to Ireland at that point. And playing up this Irish stereotype of him being like a player and a gambler and a degenerate, you know, and uncultured. There's some kind of cultural commentary there from the original, whatever it was, a short story, I think. But Kubrick definitely puts a 1970s spin on this. If he's talking about society in his own time, that's definitely a stronger stamp to me on this movie than the original morality tale or whatever it was.
Right. I wonder, because I'm not having read the book, I wondered, it's the 1970s, you know, it was a hot button time and it was a great era for film. And so, and those types of characters and that type of issue, I mean, was front and center at that time. So, yeah.
And it's interesting too, because one thing that I've definitely noticed about Kubrick in adapting things is that he didn't really give a crap about really adapting exactly what he's adapting says. I feel like he got an idea and was like, I'm gonna do my thing with it, which is why Stephen King hates The Shining, because like Kubrick's like, I know exactly what I want to do with this story, and it's not exactly respecting the themes of the actual book. And I can see where Kubrick has this idea and he puts Kubrick into it and his perspective on things. And I haven't read what this is based off of, and I have read The Shining, and there's definitely a difference in how things are portrayed. And I feel like probably A Clockwork Orange is probably his most fateful adaptation, but I don't feel like he really needs to change a whole lot to make Clockwork Orange very Kubrick, because I feel like that's something like if Kubrick wrote a book, I could see him writing that book. And I feel like Barry Lyndon, it does, and that's something that we didn't really talk about too, is like there is that stereotype throughout this film, like he's an Irishman. And there's an expectation, it's like, you're not good people. And it's like that prejudice was carried throughout this film, and you understand, like, yeah, that was the time, and like the British Empire were a big force, and they were like the ugly stepchild, and just like, you belong to us, but we don't really like you, kind of thing. And which is interesting because obviously this film deals with that. And I know we talked a lot about his stepson, and then you have his son that he has with Lady Lyndon, and they completely gone with the wind it, where it's like that poor kid. And it's just like, something bad's gonna happen to this kid, and boy, does something bad happen to that kid. And actually in a very similar way as Gone with the Wind, actually. And it's so interesting watching, and the more I'm thinking about it, like, it does seem so much like a Kubrick film, because it's like there's a lot of protagonists in Kubrick films that don't have a quote-unquote traditional arc. They wind up being exactly where they started.
So I have to bring these movies up now because of what you just said. So Scarface, the Al Pacino one. I never saw the one that came out in the mid 20th century, but Scarface, and a film that I know Jim's not a big fan of, and that's The Wolf of Wall Street, because that's exactly the type of character is you're watching, you're following this journey. No, there are a lot of people who don't like The Wolf of Wall Street. Trust me, there's a big camp. But you're carried through this journey, and you're watching these guys, you're admiring them, you like what's going on. You can't help but be inside that jacuzzi and be like, I kind of like, being in this jacuzzi and, watching the Pelicans on TV. But at the same time, am I like this person? Do I want to be like this person? If I was in this person's shoes, would I continue on that path where it goes and where it takes me, and all the people around me pulling me in to doing these sorts of things? And so I couldn't help but, when I really sat with the movie after I watched it, I couldn't help but think of Scarface and a little bit of Wolf of Wall Street. I think maybe a little bit more Scarface than Wolf of Wall Street. But it's a protagonist. Is it a protagonist and antagonist in one? Like the protagonist becomes the antagonist? I don't know.
Well, and it's interesting because it's like, I have a couple of thoughts there, because like the protagonist into the antagonist, it's like a film like There Will Be Blood. It's like your character you're following through this film, maybe at the beginning you'd think might have some redeeming qualities, but by the end you realize like this person's been the villain of the story the whole entire time. But what's interesting is, because I feel like two types of movies that this film makes me think of is, say, a Wolf of Wall Street or like a Goodfellas, where it's just like you're going through and you're living this life, and then towards the end, like things just spiral down, and you see this character have to live out all that punishment of like, this is the debauchery that you lived. And I feel like that's more the second half of this film. What I imagine the first half of this film, and this is funny because Matt brought this up at the very beginning of the podcast, was like, it has a Forrest Gump-y nature of, this is just a person being dragged through like all these occurrences. Like, this is a man who's just some young, poor Irishman that somehow winds up being enrolled in the British military, then in the Prussian military, and then he's doing all this gambling with this like other guy, and winds up being married into his family. It's like it feels like that strange, like you're all along for a ride through all these strange occurrences with this character, and
He's
arguably
failing upwards. He keeps failing upwards. Oh crap!
It's 'cause,
They
like,
found out that actually I wasn't supposed to be going that way with my horse. I'm supposed to be going that way, and then he ends up like getting rewarded for it. Yeah, like
because it's like Forrest Gump doesn't grow really in Forrest Gump. He just goes through a whole entire life worth of very interesting occurrences that takes him through his life. And I feel like that's kind of what's happening to Redmond Barry through the first half of this film. And then it takes a turn and turns into like, then he's just living all like, I think one of the first shots of him in the second half of the film is like he has two women with him half naked, and he's just like there in this whole room full of like men with all these like half naked women. I'm like, how much time has passed since like the first part of this movie? Because it's like it jumps right into it. And it's interesting because it's like when you really do think about it, does he really grow or really progress in any way? Or does he wind up exactly where he started, minus a leg?
Sure.
it's a leg.
No. Yeah. Well, so back to symbolism, if I may. You know, the missing, his father is the missing leg. Don't shoot! Don't like. It's like get off, get off the show. Like no, like I actually I don't know if that's too much of a stretch, but you know, having to amputate the leg with his mom at his bedside, you know, metaphorically, the leg was never there. You know, it's the missing piece. You know, this. Boom!
No, I like that
movie.
I like that. No, I think that's good. So at the end of the movie, basically, he looks the way his mental self was at the beginning of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or even scarier throughout. That maybe that was his mental state. That was him emotionally throughout.
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't like grow and then decline, which is even more tragic.
The thing is, like, he always had something missing there, and he couldn't fill it with the love of his cousin.
Yeah.
Because,
Right.
like that.
Sorry.
Remember the scene, guys, when is it the king who's going one by one and stopping at certain, you know, statesmen to say something, and he actually asks, I don't know if it was a king or someone else, and he actually asks if he could buy one of his paintings. He said, I really admire that painting of yours, you know, can I buy it from you? And the guy kind of looks at him like, yeah, sure, I guess, you know, we'll make an arrangement, you know. He looked at him like, that's just not something you did. You didn't like offer to buy somebody else's painting. Like that's not the way you did things, you know, like he's obviously like out of place, you know, like, okay. You know.
And I think the big thing is like he never really fit into the persona of Barry Lyndon. It's just like I don't think he was somebody that was ever meant to like he never knew how to live a life with that much money and power, and then he just threw it all away.
And going back to what Matt is saying, you can surround yourself with these things, but it's not necessarily going to make you ascend or evolve inside here. It's not necessarily going to make you into a man. You know, in the beginning of the movie, they're calling him a boy. I mean, they literally call him boy, you know, in the beginning of the movie. And so, you know, what I would say, what I like about movies like this and stories like this is because he throws caution to the wind, because he has no choice other than to take the road, you know, take the dirt path and get robbed and go into the army, is that all these things end up happening to him that would have never happened had he just stayed inside with his mom and, you know, chopped wood, you know, the rest of his life. He
didn't chuck that wine. Because like, I think one of the most interesting plot points in this whole film is when he reconnects with that military guy and he explains to him, no, Captain Quinn's still alive. They just wanted you out of there. And I'm just like, that was one of the one of those great funny, like, I don't know if it was supposed to be funny, but it's like a darkly funny moment. Like, man, they got you, Barry.
I smirked because even the bullet was not a real bullet.
Yep. And then him throwing in's like, no, he fainted.
Yeah.
Because like when they were checking to see if he was dead, no, he fainted. Because like
the general legit fainted?
Captain Quinn fainted because it just like he was probably scared.
He really was British.
Wow. And like honestly, my favorite part of this film is probably the first half hour of this film.
Yes.
And
it's
like
the spontaneous section of the film, and not for me. Yeah.
I love the scene with him and his cousin and him just being so awkward with like trying to grab the ribbon. And like I love like the dialogue in this film feels so period accurate, but so saucy at the same time, because like how they speak to each other, like Captain Quinn, who's not that big of a character in this film, his interactions between him and Redmond Barry and then his cousin are so great. And that duel is such a great scene. And I like the scene where he gets robbed. It's a great scene. Guy's just standing there with both pistols and he's being so nice about it. Like, he's not being like, oh, I'm going to kill you. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, lad. It's like, I'm going to have to take your horse too. And just like, Redmond Barry's just like, oh. Like, that's the kind of vibe I got from that scene. Is like, he doesn't know what to do. All he knows is to just sulk away from it. Because like, what's he going to do? Nothing. So he's just going to walk to the next town without a horse, without anything. Yeah. And it's just like, wow.
There was honor. It was like there was honor in thievery. Like there was like an honorable way to steal from somebody.
Yeah, and then he leaves Ireland and then goes off to France and then winds up in Prussia and then all the way around Europe. And because the thing is, I do really love this film. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I do have some things within, like, it's so interesting because like Ryan O'Neal's career apparently torpedoed because of this film. Like he was an up and coming star. He had Oscar recognition for one of his films before this, but like this film destroyed his career as a leading man because like it wasn't well received. It failed at the box office, which it's a weird film to try to throw out in like 1975 and be like, look at a 3 hour and 5 minute period piece you want in. And it's a hard sell. And because like literally the only other film that I can remember that I know Ryan O'Neal from that I've seen is A Bridge Too Far. And that's a couple years after this. It's a World War II film. There's literally 50 named actors in it. It's one of those kinds of films. So like he's in a film with Sean Connery and Gene Hackman and Sir Anthony Hopkins and like all these other people in this movie. And he's just a side American character somewhere lost in there. And because like he was an up and come, like he was like a big, attractive young star. And he took on this film and it just it set both his career and Kubrick's career in a different trajectory because Kubrick really wanted to make Napoleon, apparently. And he even cast Jack Nicholson in it.
As Napoleon?
Yes.
I would watch that movie.
I would watch that movie, but...
I'd watch the movie. I just don't agree with the casting choice.
But the thing is, that didn't happen because of this film. So he made The Shining instead. And just kept Jack Nicholson. And like that film apparently, like Kubrick's Napoleon was that film for Kubrick that he just never got made. Like how Terry Gilliam always tried to make Don Quixote and wound up making it in an odd way. I don't know if any of you have seen The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. It came out the past couple years. It's an interesting meta film.
Adam
Like,
Driver, right?
Yep.
It's on my IMDb list, but I haven't seen it yet.
It's an interesting film, him and Jonathan Pryce, but like there's so many of those directors that it's like Jodorowsky's Dune, like legendary pictures that never got made.
All right.
Apparently Kubrick's Napoleon was one of them, and Barry Lyndon sunk that ship because they're like, we're not giving you money to make another period film epic like this. Look what happened with Barry Lyndon. And then the weird thing is Kubrick made literally 3 films after that.
I'm surprised to hear that it wasn't received well, because film critics today have a very high opinion, it seems, of Barry Lyndon. It seems to have a very good rep between.
Well, and I think I alluded to that earlier, because like people hated a lot of critics hated The Shining when it first came out. And to me, like The Shining's my favorite horror film. And a lot of people have very strong feelings, because like Kubrick was nominated or won the Razzie or nominated for the Razzie for Worst Director because of The Shining.
Because of The Shining. Yeah.
So that shows how misunderstood Stanley Kubrick was at that point in time. Because now it's like any like cinephile out there like worships at Stanley Kubrick.
It's so tough, man, because I think that, we look back on some of these Kubrick films like they're legendary films, but I think, Jim, when you said heavy-handed about Barry Lyndon in the beginning, just because of the way the father dies, I went, Stanley Kubrick. I mean, he was a pretty heavy-handed director. Quentin Tarantino is also a very heavy-handed director, like the things that happen in these films are like, whoa, a head gets blown off, giant machete comes flying out of nowhere, and I think that like The Shining, in terms of like the way he uses the shots, very heavy-handed,
Well, look at 2001. Literally, the ship's shaped like a giant sperm.
Right. I mean,
like there is no second guessing that.
Yeah. The thing is, if you're some film people, film critics and audience members are not going to be down for that. And then some people are going to love it. You have filmmakers who are filmmakers because of Stanley Kubrick, some people would say that the Star Destroyer, with George Lucas now coming across the freaking screen at the very beginning of the movie that's pretty heavy-handed. But it's called Star Wars, it's supposed to be, So I couldn't help. It's fun to go back, especially this era, and read stuff that Pauline Kael wrote about these movies. Have you guys ever tried to read any of her critiques about movies?
Know. So what's interesting is I watched that documentary, what is it, Life Itself, about Roger Ebert. And he talked about her in it. Because like they weren't on the same page about what film criticism was.
Not at all. She approached it like she approached films. Here's the thing. She had a really, really good sense of like film language, and how you can use the medium of film to tell your story and to keep audiences entertained at the same time. She hated Barry Lyndon. I'm assuming she hated The Shining. I'm just going to assume it. I'm probably right. I think she liked Clockwork. I don't think she liked 2001. She was really into spontaneity, youth, female characters. She didn't mind if there was misogyny, as long as she saw the female characters like fight back with it, even if they were victims of it. She was okay with it. She hated seeing women just be quiet and, not say anything, like they were part of the furniture or something. But if you read her critiques, I would recommend you read the critique of this movie. Obviously, she didn't like it, but she's the queen of backhanded compliments. She does not insult or critique the movie without going into the specifics of why the movie was so good, or where the talent was and where the efforts were and where the work was. But then she'll say, but in the bigger picture, it makes me want to go to sleep. But she uses like really like doctoral level, like English language use to like talk about the film, and I'm like, man, inocular. I got to look up what inocular means, you know, while I'm reading this. But I can see why Roger Ebert. I mean, Roger Ebert loved. He would give 2 thumbs up to, you know, lots of things that she would be like, I'm not even gonna watch this.
Well, and it was like populist versus like film study kind of critiquing of film.
Exactly.
And that's so interesting because like people today who are like about cinema and film love Kubrick.
Right.
So it's very interesting, that different perspective, because like nobody's going to argue that Stanley Kubrick had made strong female characters in his films. Because like most of his films didn't even have any main female characters in them. So like, look at Barry Lyndon. Pretty sure Lady Lyndon's like the only named, like there's barely any women that have substantial screen time in this film.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true, but like I look at Kubrick and there's so many directors today, like a Yorgos Lanthimos. I watch a Yorgos Lanthimos film, like somebody watch some Kubrick. And like a film like The Favorite, I don't think would exist without something like Barry Lyndon. In terms of like that it looks like a Kubrick period piece. And I'm like, well, Kubrick did make a period piece, kind of like that. And like just the like that's why like there's a term Kubrickian. It's like you look at something, I'm like, somebody watched some Kubrick here and was very influenced by it. And it's like Barry Lyndon feels like that forgotten, because like I feel like most people focus on his later career films. So I think like 2001 on are like the films that a lot of people really focus on. Barry Lyndon's the only one of those films that kind of just like doesn't get as much attention as 2001, A Clockwork Orange, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, and then Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah. I look forward to seeing Paths of Glory, you know, but here's what I'm assuming before I walk in, and maybe you can, you know, and we could talk about that more next time, but I'm assuming I'm not going to feel the Kubrick as much as I feel the Kubrick from 2001 on, because there's an obvious, like, this is who I am, you know, and you could say that, but I could be wrong because I haven't seen it.
I get, because like, I feel like it's still on the same level as like Doctor Strangelove, where it's like,
Okay.
I feel like, well, just let me, like, with my point is like 2001, A Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, The Shining feel more experiential cinematic experiences. Like you're engrossed in like, I don't know if I'm in love with the character. So it's like, think about 2001: A Space Odyssey. What do you know about any of those characters?
They like chess.
The most interesting character is HAL 9000, and it's not even a person.
That's right.
It's an experience. And like The Shining's an experience. It's an atmospheric type thing. Paths of Glory is still in that time where it feels narrative and character driven.
Right.
And before Kubrick just lost himself in that like big scale kind of filmmaking, but there's still the craft there. There's some amazing camera work and amazing just visuals in that film. But because the thing is, think about this. Probably be slow. So 2001, the biggest name actor, and it's a Keir Dullea. And think about like A Clockwork Orange. Like Malcolm McDowell is like a known actor, but like he's not a movie star. And like Ryan O'Neal at the time was probably close to being a movie star, but like at least nowadays, like he's not a huge star. Jack Nicholson's a different story. Full Metal Jacket, there's no like big stars in it. You have Kirk Douglas in Paths of Glory. And Kirk Douglas, I think, was a big part of Kubrick becoming a big director because of Spartacus and because of Paths of Glory. Because like, if there's a Kubrick film that feels the least Kubrick film, it's probably Spartacus. because it's very much like a studio film. And he didn't write it. Dalton Trumbo actually wrote it. And I learned all about that in Trumbo, starring Bryan Cranston. But I feel like Paths of Glory still has that Kubrick spirit. There's a darkly funny nature to like how things are portrayed and the ridiculous of war. So I'm looking forward to watching that. And I feel like you have to have a certain kind of sense of humor to appreciate humor in Kubrick films. Because it's not like, haha, that's a funny joke. No, it's either very darkly sarcastic or just dark, some dark humor. But I guess, does anybody have any final thoughts on Barry Lyndon?
Just that, like, I'm looking forward to kind of watching it again, or at least, like you guys said, the first like 30 minutes or act one even, and taking a look at those wide shots, the shots that are meant to look like paintings, like Baroque paintings, or even I'm guessing it's Baroque just from the time period. And then finding Barry and seeing if Barry actually fits in or not, because everybody kind of seems to agree that he doesn't really fit in with where he's going, or at least he's in disguise. So like wondering, I'm curious now if he like actually his disguise is appropriate in these shots and if it fits or not. Definitely looking forward to Paths of Glory. I have one note from each of you guys. I wanted to check in and just, so the favorite, I'm on IMDb. There are like 5 of these. Which year was the favorite you just referenced?
2018. I think
recent. Okay.
It's from Yorgos Lanthimos. It has Olivia Colman, Rachel Weisz, and Emma Stone in it.
I like Rachel Weisz. Okay. Thanks, Shane. Pauline Kael, Alex. She's a film critic. Who did she write for?
Oh, well, she's passed, but she was a big-time film critic in the 60s and 70s. And she wrote in the 80s too, for the New Yorker. You can find her articles in like old New Yorker articles. If you just Google Pauline Kael, Barry Lyndon, or Pauline Kael, Blade Runner, whatever the movie is, I think there's something called Articles from the Loft or something from the loft.com. And that's actually where I find a lot of the articles that they post from her.
Awesome.
Oh, look at this. Scraps from the loft.com. Scraps from the loft. And you'll see the level of, she was great with her words, but she pulled no punches, and directors some people hated her.
The job of a critic is easy, right?
She's like the critic from like Birdman.
I was just thinking of that. The critic for Birdman. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Matt, to answer your question from earlier, like way back, that's the Barry Lyndon I would have lunch with. Applebee's, was it? Maybe we'd go to a bar instead. Like the Barry Lyndon that deserted from the British Army. That's the Barry Lyndon that I would hang out with.
Okay.
Who is Daniel Plainview?
Oh, that's the main character from
There Will Be Blood.
Oh,
And like,
I gotta watch
so if you think of like Luke Skywalker being, wow, okay, he's ambitious. Like Daniel Plainview is kind of like the value of the character value, like being ambitious, but just being like bloodthirsty.
He could arguably he's a sociopath.
Yeah.
Like he uses a child, like a child whose father has died, to basically, he's like, to quote Daniel Plainview himself, "You are nothing more than a bastard in a basket." And like he used your smile to sell oil and buy land. That's basic, like that's the kind of human being he is. Arguably not a human being. So that is an 2 hour and 40-minute just descent into a horrible, horrible person.
Would not invite to Applebee's. I think I would leave him out of the group text.
No, because I wouldn't want to cross him and wind up dead, honestly.
in the parking lot.
Had my head beaten in by a bowling pin.
It's such a weird way to kill someone, by the way.
I could go, like, if we ever wind up talking, like, watching There Will Be Blood, I have so much to say about that movie. And I love that scene because that is one of the, like, I'm surprised I didn't bring that up as, like, shocking moments in our last podcast, because, like, that whole entire last scene of that movie, you're just like, what did I just watch? And then him just sitting there, I'm finished. And then, like, the and like just the score kicks up. I'm just like, what did I just watch? But yeah, so I highly recommend There Will Be Blood.
I've seen it
Shane,
once,
so
but it's
your number
easy
one.
to
What'd you
rewatch.
say?
What, Matt?
Number one.
Is that your number one movie
What?
of all time? There Will Be Blood.
There Will Be Blood is in like my top. It's very close to my top 10. Very close.
Oh, gotcha.
For how much I love that film, I'm surprised it's not in my top 10. I guess I just have like a stronger feeling about the other ones, but like I love that film. And it's crazy because that and No Country for Old Men came out the same year. What a wonderful year in cinema.
That's a damn good movie.
Another one I'd love to talk about, have a lot of thoughts about. Any
I
other
think-
last minute thoughts on Barry Lyndon?
Barry Lyndon. Well, I love the having lunch at Applebee's thing. I think that's really funny. I agree. I think I would. What's his name? Barry Redmayne or
So his name was Redmond Barry.
Redmond Barry. I was at Eddie Redmayne. I don't know that. No. Yes, I would have Applebee's with Eddie Redmayne any day. Redmond Barry. I agree. I would have lunch with Redmond and Redmond Barry over definitely probably would not want to hang out with Barry Lyndon because Redmond Barry's a real guy. He's a real.
Because also, if you piss him off, he'll literally hit you with a stick.
Or jump you and beat the crap out of you. Because, like, when he started throwing fists in that scene, I'm just like, oh man, this movie's getting crazy.
Oh crap! I forgot he went through basic training. Like,
Well,
this guy can brawl.
Dude, because he does. We didn't even talk about this scene, but like he has that fight earlier in the film with that guy that's like twice his size, and they're throwing fisticuffs, and he just like beats the crap out of him.
Yeah, bare knuckle boxing there.
He's a scrappy guy.
I want to bring up. I hesitate to bring this up, but because I don't want to end on such a down note. You know, we didn't talk about his son dying, and the contrast going. This is also slightly a technical thing that Stanley Kubrick. I think another director. This would be kind of like it's scary, like you're walking a tightrope, but it really worked because when the boy has his birthday party. And they're like flailing. They got the tassels going, and there's ponies, and there's two like sheep that they're taking him on. And I thought in my head like, oh, that's some hokey shit right there. And then like 20 within the next half hour, the next time you see the kid being pulled by the two sheep, he's dead. It was like that contrast was so like, oh my God, you know, it's heartbreaking and really dark and morbid.
It's like, you thought I was being cute?
If you look at those two things, if you were to do those things side by side, right, you thought I was being cute because that was what I was like, man, that is the cheesiest thing I've ever seen, contrasted by the darkest thing I've seen. It was really, that was really well done.
Contrast that with like probably the weirdest randomest acting with that guy that choked or didn't take his pills in time.
Oh,
Lyndon, right?
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, Lyndon.
Redmond Barry puffed his chest out, and that guy died. That's basically what happened. He's just like, gonna have your woman? No, you're not. And like, yep, and he's like, and yes, he did have your woman.
I think that was supposed to be funny in a way. That scene was supposed to be kind of funny.
Yeah, that's the thing, because Kubrick has like a dark sense of humor. So like there's definitely things that are supposed to be funny that you're kind of sitting there like, should I be laughing? Do I want to be laughing at this? Kubrick's laughing at this, but he's also a dark human being.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah.
How about you, Matt? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, people are terrible. I'm happy that the stepson. I forget. Okay, this is my final thought. I forget. Did the wife, Lady Lyndon, whatever, did she just stare at that check or did she smile? It's been maybe a couple of weeks. I forget. But did she stare at it or did she smile? Because if she smiled, then it makes me think that she's going to get better. But if she just stared at it, then okay, whatever. Did she smile?
I thought she in that moment, my interpretation was that she kind of missed him.
That's what I kind of thought.
Because going back to our conversation about, the redemptive and the non-redemptive, and, like there's, even though, he was pretty shitty to her, she actually still loved him, I mean, at one point, she was in love with it. That's also an interpretation, but she must have had feelings for him despite all of that.
And what she was sitting there thinking was, now I'm stuck with my son who knows no boundaries.
And the creepiest priest ever put to film. Like, not a fan.
Yeah, there's some like not gonna lie, the amount of makeup on a lot of the characters in the second half of the film, I'm a little creeped out by just looking at them, because like they put way too much makeup on. You look like a vampire. Like you do not look like you're living anymore. Did somebody drop powder on you? That's honestly how
that was usually when they were getting together with their other high class guests, right? Like everybody was like, I've got to look as white as possible. Was that? I don't know. Was that?
Got to dress up like clowns. That's what we got to do.
Pretty much, yeah. That came across as parodic to me. Like, obviously, people didn't. And did you notice how many birthmarks they had on their face? Not just one, which was two, or I think one of them even had 3 birthmarks drawn onto their face. Ridiculous. I think that was also humor. Yeah.
What's the incentive behind the birthmark thing?
It's a beauty mark. So one is fashionable. Think Marilyn Monroe.
Okay. So one fashionable, and two is
it's too much. Yeah.
3's like, what are you doing?
3 looks like a disease. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's funny because my girlfriend loves random knowledge and stuff like that, and she's like, the reason they wore all that makeup was because a lot of those people had syphilis and stuff to cover up a lot of stuff. And she's like, there's a distinct lack of syphilis in this movie, and I'm just like, fair.
Or smallpox scars, maybe.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
There was not enough disease in this movie for this time period.
That's a fair assessment.
On that note,
Jane, that should be the intro. There was not enough disease in this movie.
That's the quote.
Yeah.
Oh, here's the thing.
I can leave you guys with a quote if that's okay. I did write down one quote from the movie. Here it is. Okay, so here's the quote. We bear but one flower, comma, then we die. That was my favorite quote from the whole movie. And that's also in the first 10 minutes. We bear but one flower, then we die. There you go.
That came from his cousin to the British general.
I forget.
Yeah. We bear but one flower, then we die. And she said that to him, to the general. Yeah.
So I have one quote that kind of sums up the feelings of the story in this film. and Matt will appreciate this because this is hitting on his points that he's been making this whole time. And Alex will get this reference. Life sucks, and then you die. That's this movie in a nutshell. Vince McMahon.
I might get might see his face tonight. My brother.
The Rumble.
The Rumble's on.
The Rumble's tonight.
Yeah.
So, but that was our chat about Barry Lyndon. And I hope you all enjoyed this. And I look forward to hope that you all tune in next time to our podcast. But I guess 2 shows from now, we'll be sitting and chatting about Paths of Glory, which will be our next film. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into Kubrick's films a little bit earlier, before his films just went like, pure Kubrick. Mm-hmm. And so, but Alex, James, Matt, and Vinny, who had to leave us early, thank you all for coming on, and thank you all for tuning in and supporting the Development Hell podcast.